Hi, I'm RackForms, and in this video, I'm really pleased to be showing you an initial look. This won't be the complete one, but the initial look at version 6.0 of RackForms. It is due to be released in March of 2017. And so what I wanted to do here is, for existing users, give you a look at some of the features and functionality that's new, some of the fixes as well. And for prospective users, give you a look at some of the things that you can expect if you choose to use RackForms in your next project. So let's get started. So starting back here at build 896, we have a couple features highlighted here. So one of the things I'm most pleased with is Flash has now been completely removed from the editor interface. So it used to be, we only had it in two places, but it used to be that if we had a background image for a form item, or if we had a image display item, we would have a Flash uploader for that particular value. Well, again, no more. What's nice about it though is we still have the drag and drop capability. So if I have an image, I can just drag it over the well right here and it uploads it to the editor, or we can use the browse option as we're used to doing. So both options work brilliantly, and again, happy to have Flash completely removed from the RackForms interface. We now have added multi-part file uploads for HTTP request items. This is admittedly a little bit more advanced, but the basic idea here is actually pretty simple. If you have an HTTP request item in your form, and we can find those under the network section, we basically can now select from a drop-down item a post, and then as long as we have PHP 5.5 or higher, we can select multi-part data. This is used for, very specifically, web services that have file uploads that we expect the web service to consume as normal multi-part form data. In other words, if you treat your web service as you would just a standard web form, which is the way we should usually be doing it, not standard post data, you're now going to get those file upload items delivered to you. So really pleased about that one. It kind of pushes RackForms forward in the space of web services in a really positive way. Finally, for this version, we now have this, again, pretty advanced here, but we have this ability to use custom code integration. So what this basically means is in RackForms, in our installation folder, we have app, move files, lib, and then custom includes. Basically, anything that we put in this bucket right here is going to be moved over to any job that we create, and that includes include code in the top of your page. This is really useful for things where we need to include security code or things like LDAP login in every single job that we want to output, or even possibly just including style sheets for each one of our jobs. So really happy to have that type of functionality in there. In build 898 here, we had one really important fix here, which is that field controls were hidden after we deleted a bucket. So there are a lot of fixes as we move throughout here. Again, I just wanted to highlight this one because this is one of those annoying little interface quirks that it existed in RackForms for quite a while, and it's now been fixed. The other thing I will call out quickly is that deleting items is now literally twice as fast in RackForms. Sometimes the smallest and simplest things are often the best. In the particular case of that, all we did is we just have the animation time that we use when we delete items. So instead of having to wait for the thing to kind of fade out, we now just almost instantaneously delete it. So it's just little things like that that we're always trying to do to make the RackForms interface itself more pleasurable to use. A couple features here that I do want to call out. We now support calendars and data grids, so that's kind of nice if we're doing more advanced work or something where we need to capture dates. We have a new blank/not blank feature added to conditional code. So in other words, if I'm building out some conditional logic here, I can now say if the field is blank or not blank. And this is just really handy for those times where we want to say, look, if this field is empty, then we want to show something, or correspondingly, if it's not empty, we want to show something. So really happy to have that in there. And then finally, two things I'm really excited about for this particular release. Our PDF import process has been made much more powerful. So to show that off, let me go ahead and start the PDF import process. I have a PDF right here. Let me show it to you in PDF format, where we have a typical form that is that contains web form fields, though it wasn't necessarily built for web consumption. As a matter of fact, this is certainly not built for web consumption. In other words, we have fields here, but this is not going to work well on a website at all. And so the new feature here is in RackForms, we can select mobile ready from the PDF workflow list. And when I do this, watch this, is really cool. RackForms, instead of creating essentially a one-to-one representation of the field, is actually just going to turn it into what would conceivably be a mobile ready web form. Now, there are obviously things that are going to be somewhat limiting to this. So for example, if your field name in the PDF file is not quite appropriate, we're still going to have problems like this right here, where for example, the field name is kind of a jumbled of non-English characters. But in general, RackForms will do a pretty good job of doing things like if we have camel case names, it's going to break items apart. And if we have things like numbers in our fields, it's going to either delete those numbers or it's going to place the numbers appropriately where they should be. Again, it's not a complete solution for this because, again, PDF to HTML workflow is still a little bit of a mixed bag. Again, as I always say, it's garbage in, garbage out. So if we have a really high quality PDF that was designed carefully, we're going to have a really easy time with our import. But if it was a PDF that was maybe converted into a web form, or excuse me, into an Acrobat form, using like an automated process, it's still going to give us a little bit of problem because, again, things like this sometimes are not going to quite work. But again, RackForms makes it very easy to do things where we clean up our field names. So really excited about that. The other thing I would like to call out briefly here is that we have been making a lot of strides in doing things like when we do want to do a one-to-one conversion, making it so that our fields look better. So for example, I can now give global offsets to fields. So let's say I drag this PDF in here. The one thing that is going to happen often is our fields are not going to be quite placed exactly where we expect them to be. So for example, here you can see that these guys are just a little bit lower than what I want them to be. So what I can do for that now is I can basically go in here and I can say that text boxes would have, for example, a -2 pixel offset in the Y direction. So I can literally just put that in here. You notice that all my text boxes are going to bump up just a little bit. Now again, it's always garbage in, garbage out, as we say. So if you have differences in the way your fields are displayed, so for example, this guy was already placed in the right location, but these guys are better, we're still going to want to go in here and holding on the Option key, kind of manually move some of these fields around so they work better. Now, the one thing that you will notice about this is something we're really pleased about is that we have separate offsets for the major form field types. So you'll notice here that our radio and checkboxes are just a little bit off. In fact, it looks like they're off in mainly the Y direction. So we can do things like we can just say, well, let's bump those up by -3 pixels. And by the way, don't actually include the text for the radio items. So you notice here that these are yes and no. We can actually remove these guys so that they just start to become standard input fields. And again, with a little bit of tweaking here, and again, this is especially helpful if you kind of batch group these in, we can very quickly basically just make it so that RackForms imports those items almost exactly as we want them. And again, I don't want to spend too much time here, but you'll notice here that we're starting to really get these guys dialed in perfectly. And so again, want to make sure that the PDF workflow folks out there have a much easier time of just building forms that work just by tweaking a few knobs, as opposed to having to kind of edit the form after the import process. Okay, so to quickly move on then, always love to add brand new features to RackForms, and one of those is we now have an FTP, which is, I should be more specific, an SFTP connection method. So we can find that under our confirmation items. So if I add a submission page here and go down to the items that we can add, we now have this SFTP. We have lots and lots of features for this. So we can enable, disable it. We can log any connections that we have. We could set the login, the port, what directory we want it to go to, etc., etc. And this even supports file uploads as well too, like using a very simple drop down here. So a lot of features for this. This is really handy and just yet another way of the many that we can basically send data from RackForms to the places that we need it to go. Moving on to build 899 then, we now have a quantity drop down for e-commerce items. Really excited about this. It's kind of a missing feature from our original implementation, but you now basically set how many items you want to have. So quickly add this to our form right here. So here's an e-commerce item, and I'll basically drag this down here. You can see now that I can tell it, do I want to show a quantity dropdown? If so, what is its label? And then what is the max quantity that I want to display? So you have control over all that, and RackForms, of course, will automatically tally up those totals and the invoice that we create for you. Moving on to Build 900, we now have additional styling options for radio and checkbox item options. So this is something that was kind of a long time coming as well. Let me delete this page to clean things up here a little bit. Basically, in RackForms, we have long had the ability to essentially grab the label of a particular item and apply a custom style to it. So I can just really quickly drag up and down here to adjust the point size. But we now have a separate option here for controlling the input sizes of our input fields. And this is, again, something I'm really excited about here. Again, this is something that was kind of a long time coming and now finally exists within the editor. So we now have independent control over our option groups. This is really handy when we want precise control over the way our form looks. And then finally, another select type feature that we have here, we now have opt group support for select items. So if I have a select menu right here, if I go down to its options right here, I can say opt group and then the label of what it is. For example, like this. So I could say names, and then I can put in, like, let's say Steve and Matt, and then I can close the opt group like this, and I can basically just duplicate this for every additional field that I want to create option groups. So 0 to 10, etc., etc., and then basically close this guy off right here so that we build nice option groups into our items right here. So really, really easy here to build those in now. In Build 901, we now have, well, this is something I'm super excited about. We now have something called global styles. So how do these work? Well, in addition to RackForms itself, we'll talk about this last year having a brand new interface, we also have the ability to much more quickly in the past, apply a global style to our entire form. So let's just go ahead and let's just create a new job right here and just show you how easy this is. So let's say I'm going to create a form, and I'm going to have a couple input fields, maybe some radio items. Actually, I'm going to save time, not have radio items, so I'll just put a select, let's say a text area in there, and then I'll have a submit button. Basically, what I can do to this now is I can set a few general properties like field width, for example, and apply that to all the fields on my form. And when I build this form previously, I would get something that looks essentially like this. And there's really nothing wrong with this, in particular if we want to embed this form somewhere. But if we wanted to create a nice full page form that had beautiful CSS3 and HTML5 properties to assign to it, it was kind of hard to do that. And it was especially hard to do that if we wanted to create a responsive form. Well, now with global styles, all we do is just select from our dropdown which style we want, and RackForms is automatically going to build a full page form using these beautiful styles. And most importantly, it's a fully responsive form as well. Now again, we're still developing this version of RackForms, so we're going to have more styles yet to come. But right now we have these two, material and modern. Of course, material is based on Google style, and then this modern style is based on this beautiful look right here. But you'll notice now it's just much more easy to build forms that are responsive and have all these beautiful little tricks that modern web form users expect from them. And of course, most importantly, our forms work much better on mobile devices now as well. So really excited about this feature, and we're gonna have more stuff like this in the future where we make it easier to build forms that just look good straight out of the box. In Build 903, we had one major feature, which was the webcam module. I believe we already have a blog post about this. The basic idea, though, is pretty simple. If I want to have a webcam on my form, I can literally just go down and under Advanced Fields, add a webcam module, and I can simply say, when I run this form, go ahead and turn my webcam on for my device. And you will now see me pop up here. Let me shrink this down here a little bit. Hello, everybody. Here we have a webcam going. Now, what's nice about this is I can take a snapshot, and then this snapshot is going to become a standard element that I can upload to any email, database, or file system method. And so it's really handy and beautifully simple to add this webcam module in there. And this is really handy for things like if we're doing identification cards at, say, a college a check-in process. We can just have a phone running with this form, and we just take somebody's picture and then take that snapshot, and it'll automatically upload to the places we need it to go. So again, just yet another new feature on RackForms that we're excited to have and should make your life easier as you're building forms. Finally, the last major feature I wanted to talk about before we get to the updated user interface is the user auditing under user management. So this is again something I'm really excited about. Basically, we have added auditing to the entire system of RackForms, and we can filter by user as you'd expect. And when I select a user in the system, I get an entire list of all of the operations that that user is performing on my system. So I can see what they actually did, and if I hover over it, I'll see what job, for example, they updated. If they deleted a job, I can see what that job was, and so on and so forth. So we have tons and tons of entries in here. Again, very easy to filter these by users so we can see what that particular user was doing. And even better, we can enable or disable user auditing with just a single click right here. So if I don't want to audit anymore, I could just simply turn it off, and I could turn it on just as easily. So really excited about that as a feature. It's going to make it much easier to manage multiple users in RackForms, or just keep track of what you're doing as you edit the system. Finally, though, the last thing I did want to touch on is that user interface. So look, looks are one thing. A lot of times looks are skin deep. We don't want to make too much out of this in terms of this is a feature, because honestly, we think the star of the show is just the capabilities that RackForms has. But I will have to admit, I am a sucker for things that look good. I'm a sucker for things that are aesthetically pleasing, and I really do think that we've hit it out of the park with the new design of RackForms. But that said, it is more than just a change in look. So the main thing that's really changed here in RackForms is we want to make it easier to get at things that you use very often. So the one thing that you'll notice if you're a longtime RackForms user is that we now have this block called common attributes. Now, we've long since had something called basic attributes, but basic attributes would change in position depending on where we were in the system. So for example, if I was editing a bunch of items, so let's say I had a couple text fields in here, and let's say I was editing things like the helper text, but I wanted to change the label, I'd have to scroll around a lot to get back up to the place where those basic attributes were. Well, now that we have these basically stuck to the top of the page right here, it's much, much easier to just say, as I'm bouncing through here, keep all of these major fields, the ones that we use most often, pinned to the top, and then we can scroll around in our bottom items and work with those more esoteric features that we change less often. Of course, we still have the ability to actually pull out menus at any time. So if I want to just basically go in here and pull out basic attributes and common attributes, make my window a little bit bigger here, I can do that too. And what's really, really nice about this, actually let me do this for conditional processing right here. If I have something like conditional processing where I'm doing a lot of custom code work right here, I no longer actually have to scroll at all to get to my conditional processing. It's just always shown right here. So as I select different fields, again, instead of having to scroll around a lot, all I have to do is just see what the current settings are right here. So really, really pleased about this, because we think that not only does the new user interface present a much nicer look, we think it's a lot easier to find things. All the text has been made bolder. But it's also, with our common attributes here, I think much easier to use RackForms now. There's just simply less scrolling that we have to do. So that is our look at the version 6.0 of RackForms. Obviously, there's a lot more work to be done yet. You're probably going to see changes in the way most of these major attributes look. We're going to keep putting more things in common attributes and shifting things around in the editor. And of course, we'll be adding a few smaller features as time goes on. But that's where we currently stand. So I'm very much looking forward to existing users' feedback. This will, of course, be a free update. And if you're a potential user of RackForms, please know that with RackForms, nobody is going to take care of you better than what we do. We listen to every single request that we get in. Every feature that you might want to add, we're going to add it for you. We are absolutely fanatical about making the best form software on the planet. So thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. We hope to hear your feedback about this. And of course, thank you for watching.